Hello everyone, how you doing? Philip here for another video. So a couple of days ago I did this live stream and it felt like I was not using the most quality that I usually have. So I took a look at my settings and I realized that I made a few mistakes. I also tried to optimize a few things today, did a few tests with Mayor. Thank you very much for your insights. So yeah, I'm gonna report them here on this video. So in a couple of months, I will remember what is optimum, what is not optimum, and that kind of stuff. So a few things that if you're completely new to OBS, if you go to settings on output, you can define what kind of encoder you're using for the stream. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, which I do, I have a GeForce 970 GTX, you can use the NVENC encoder, which uses the GPU itself to encode your video instead of using your CPU to do it. I have an i7, so my CPU sort of could handle it. I actually was handling that with the CPU during the live stream. So you would have like an X264 option here by default. And I was using bitrate of 2500, constant bitrate of 2500, which is way too low for 1080p stuff, especially at 60 frames per second. So these are the main characteristics that you should figure out. What resolution you want to be streaming on, what bitrate you should be using, it should be appropriate to that, and the frame rate that you're using, if it's 60 frames per second or 30 or 25, it affects how much bitrate you need for that. Also, the quality options matter. Maximum number of frames and keyframe intervals, not so much, but there are a few recommendations. And the profile is also usually recommended that you stick with the main profile. And the preset you can define if you want higher quality or faster stuff. So if you are doing very fast encoding, you usually end up with more blurred regions on the frames. Especially if you have like games or anything visual on screen that is too pixel detailed, or things that are not very close together in terms of from pixel to pixel. If you're watching like a movie, you can't tell as much, but if you're watching something that has a lot of lines, you will notice it a lot more. So things that I should mention. Constant bitrate versus variable bitrate. Usually variable bitrate would be better, but most stream ingesting systems like Twitch and YouTube prefer constant bitrate to make sure that they can keep the bitrate constant, and they allow a better user experience on the other end. Variable bitrate is harder to sync with other stuff, so they prefer you, and some of them force you to use constant bitrate. So I changed my settings to rescale stuff to 720p. All my screens and my canvas is on 1080p, but I scale stuff down to 720p. Usually it's okay. There are a few scaling options that you can use. I use bicubic. I think it's the one that is here by default. I don't really notice the difference much between every different one of them, so it doesn't really matter much for me, but I know that especially some of them are better for sharper things like letters, for example, that you would want to read, and others are better for more blurry areas like for movies overall. So those options do matter. Also the frame rate that you're on, I'm recording at 60 frames per second because I wanted to have frame accurate for some game recordings. And then I ended up forgetting about it and leaving it at that. But if you're doing just a live stream, usually it's better that you have 30 frames per second because people don't really notice the difference unless it's like a particular game that is very frame rate dependent. Then people might notice the difference. Anyways, let's go through the recommendations from Twitch and YouTube. You can see here is the page for the Twitch recommendations. And they tell you that if you're doing 1080p at 60 frames per second, you should have a minimum of 6000 kbps. I think this 6000 is capped by Twitch itself. They don't receive higher, or you need to be like a special partner thing for you to be able to stream higher. And then you're also limited by the encoder itself. If you don't know what an encoder is, how it works is that it takes the frame and it packs it into something smaller that can be sent out. If there are a lot of different things, a lot of details that need to be packed properly without losing quality, if you have like a black screen, it's very easy to encode. It just says that it repeats the level black throughout the whole screen, so it packs very well. If it's something that changes a lot, it's a lot harder to pack together. So there are different encoders that do this packing, and some are faster and some are more reliable in terms of quality, but have higher size. If you have higher size, it needs more bitrate to send it through in real time for the other people to catch it on the other side. So that's where the bitrate comes in. And a variable bitrate means that when you need these spikes of packing more stuff, you can include that information. A constant bitrate says that if you are doing those all those packing times and at some point you have way too much information, you won't be able to put all the information in and you will lose quality on those particular frames. So yeah, the recommendations for the NVIDIA NVENC specs, you see them here. It's 6000 kbps if you want to do 1080p. If you do it at 30 frames per second, you can use slightly lower bitrate. And at 720p, 60 frames per second, you should do 4500. I'm currently using this at 5000 kbps, so slightly more quality. And the kind of stuff that I do for especially shaders, I was streaming pixel shader stuff, so it's pixel perfect kind of stuff, so it needs usually more detail than your random game where most of the screen is doesn't really mind much if it's slightly blurred. Let's say it like that. X264 specs, this is for your CPU. They're very similar, they don't vary that much, just the presets and the profiles change slightly with things. So yeah, let's take a look at YouTube recommendations, and they have like 4K and stuff like that because it's also valid for video, but usually you need a dedicated machine. If you want to live stream this, you need a dedicated machine to be encoding the signal and streaming the signal also. This bitrate, when we say that you need the bitrate of, let's go back to a more reasonable example, 5000 kbps, this is 5 megabytes per second. So if your upload is, in my case, I have 15 megabytes per second upload. You need these constant throughout your stream. If you have a peak or a loss of megabytes per second capacity on your bandwidth at some point, you will clip the 5000 kbps or 5 mbps. So you need to be aware of how much traffic you're going to generate. In this case, if you have the encoder at 5000, you know that you will be using at least 5000 or about 5000. It can be less for the stream to be reliably smooth. So you need to take that into account, and other stuff that you have opened up. You might be checking other things or uploading other things, uploading to multiple sources. That all consumes bandwidth, so you need to be careful monitoring that. Anyways, recommendation for YouTube for 1080p 60 frames per second. It's about similar to the other one, between 3000 and 6000. If you do 720p, you can do a little bit lower, not that much. They also recommend you to go up to 6000. I have mine at 5000 because I don't want to reach the cap on Twitch. I want to make sure that the image remains steady. So yeah, that's it pretty much. NVENC right now uses the H264. I think there will be new versions for the new graphics cards. They will use the new version of the encoder, the 265, and that will allow stuff to be much faster. That will become the future, but probably not the norm in 1 or 2 years, I think. So let's wait and see for that. Sound usually doesn't take as much as the video does, so usually you just want to do it at a reasonable thing. 44 kilohertz or 48 doesn't really matter much. Stereo and 128K is usually enough. If you want to ensure quality, you should rise up to 192, or 320 is the optimum. But 192 is usually okay, unless you're doing like specific music thing that you need to be like pitch perfect and stuff like that, where with a lot of things going on, then you might need more audio bitrate, but it doesn't cost as much as video typically does. So yeah, that's the video that I wanted to do, just to document the settings that I'm currently using and why, so I remember in a few months' time why I have these settings like I do. So yeah, I hope this video was useful for someone and not just me. See you next time. Bye bye everyone. Take care.